Welcome back to XR at Work. I'm Scott,
And I'm Dane.
and we are two guys that work in manufacturing that put technology in the hands and on the heads of factory workers. Today, we're going to talk about why XR in manufacturing. Maybe you're already doing XR, maybe you're considering it. We're just going to share with you some of our thoughts of common use cases and why we feel like it's a real home run to use this technology in manufacturing. So, Dane, let's start with you. Tell us about in your day job, what are the common use cases you're seeing, or how are you guys using XR in your factories?
Yeah, no. So I think you can break XR down into a couple of different categories, obviously. So you have, virtual reality, and you have, augmented reality, and there's a few others that aren't as, widely used. But from a virtual reality perspective, we use it a lot for, training people. So, a challenge, especially in today's day and age, one is availability of people physically, in a location. And then, the other problem might be actual availability of the asset. And so what I mean by, availability in a physical location is, if you work for a business that's distributed, globally, given the pandemic that we're in currently, there's challenges with getting your subject matter experts and stuff to facilities. And so what virtual reality enables us to do is we can institutionalize a lot of the knowledge that we have around those, processes. We can put it into a training, and then, people can do that training asynchronously. So they don't have to be in the same place at the same time with the trainer and all that fun stuff. And so that's a big use case. And it also, back to the kind of, asset availability, type conversation. The challenge that you might also run into is, like, if your factory is running 100% of the time, and training requires a piece of the factory to be shut down, well, now it's really hard to train people. And so if you duplicate your process in virtual reality, it allows you to train people on the process without actually being out in the field. Especially, the other kind of funny part of this is, factories are not quiet and pleasant places to be generally. And so from a training perspective, it actually offers an environment that's more exciting for the trainee as well. And so that's kind of what we're using virtual reality for. Do you guys have use cases for virtual reality?
We use VR a little bit. We mostly use virtual reality so like one of the things that we manufacture are physical objects like retail displays that could be 6 foot tall, 10 foot wide. So when our designers, our immersive designers, build a prototype, they used to have to build an actual wood, metal, glass prototype and ship it to the customer to look at. But now we've taken these prototypes and we do a version in VR. The customer can go in the headset, they can look at the prototype, give us feedback, and we can go back and forth that way with the customer. We could even get into something like, the wild or spatial or something, where we go in at the same time and look at it and talk about it. Yeah, but this is a little bit taller. This glass panel's too big, that kind of stuff. And we can work through it that way with the customer in VR in a common environment before we ever build the prototype. So that means that when we start putting hammer to nail, we're doing pretty much the final version. So we can kind of cut out some of those initial iterations doing it digitally.
That's interesting. So it's like, reduction of cycle time for you
Right.
guys in, design to end product.
Yeah, yeah. But
Oh,
you brought up a good point, Dane, with VR for training. It is true that our factories are tired of corporate coming in every week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and needing the machine to be brought down so they can build some training or do some sort of XR experience. And if you can take that into the conference room, into the training room, and get off the factory floor, you can keep that almighty production rate that we covet so much in manufacturing. You can keep it high, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I think there's something to be said for experience too, because if you think about, training in the context of those, criteria or whatever, where you might have 20 minutes of downtime that you can go and train on the asset, like you don't get the iterations, and the way that people learn things is by doing it over and over again. That's how you get really good at it. And so I think that's another thing that VR is, that's a real, at least for me, it's a real benefit, is that you can run through and do it 8 times in a row instead of having to take it down 20-minute segments 8 times. And the other thing is, like, when you take it down for 20 minutes, it may be once every couple of weeks that you can take it down like that. And so from a cadence perspective, you're kind of reliant on the ability to bring that down. And so overall, virtual reality is just a great tool for getting those iterations or getting your reps, if you will, in a training environment.
So like we say, you got unlimited lives in VR, right? You can blow stuff up
That's right.
and just restart. Yeah, like a video game. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's cool too, like to your point, like you can give constructive feedback as they go. And so, if somebody does make a mistake, you don't have to have the trainer, talking in your ear about, hey, this is what you did wrong, blah, blah, blah. You can actually have the system provide that feedback. Yeah. And so it's kind of, training in a box, if you will, and it allows you to do, a lot of that stuff. One thing that's interesting, sorry, I know all these things are interesting, but one more thing that's interesting is the analytics that you can pull from virtual reality is really interesting. Well, actually, XR in general, right? The data that you can get and the richness of that from a performance perspective is pretty cool too. So you can track how effectively somebody went through things or where they're looking. Like in your guys' marketing, like you can put the customer in and see what draws their eye, that kind of stuff. So it's that's a super cool space. But we kind of talked about VR a little bit. The other part of this is AR. So how are you guys using augmented reality?
So we do a ton of AR, right? So probably of everything that we do XR related in our factories, we do probably 5 to 10% in VR. The other 90% is augmented reality. It's devices, I always say devices in the hands and on the heads of factory workers, training them, supporting them. That's a big thing for us, right? We've got a lot of factories. I know you guys do too. And so maybe, those are listening to the podcast today, maybe you've got a lot of factories that you're supporting, and being able to take training and give it to factory workers in a way that's easy to consume, easy to digest, where they're at on a device that's easy for them to use, on the factory floor. I mean, we recognize that as being hugely beneficial, right? So we do what we call factory AR, which is really two things. We do remote expert, right? Which everyone's doing remote expert. You should be doing remote expert.
Yep.
So some sort of remote expert capability so they can tap into a remote expert, hence the name.
So real quick before you go on from, like, if there's somebody in the audience that doesn't know what remote expert is, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so remote expert is, I have a device on my head or in my hands, and we get into a call, and then someone remotely, if I'm in the factory, can see through my camera. They can talk to me. They can say, here, yeah, that is what I want you to fix. Saying, okay, then I can fix it, right? So it's the ability to do kind of a two-way call. And a lot of times remote expert should give you the ability for the remote expert to annotate on the screen in the field of view of the person in the factory. So if they're wearing a HoloLens or they've got a spatially aware handheld device, they can annotate and circle things, do arrows, that sort of thing, to be able to show this is exactly the part I want you to fix. So those are remote expert calls.
Gotcha. So that kind of goes back to, not having the subject matter experts in the place, geographically that you need them.
Absolutely.
And so you're kind of diversifying or, expanding where they can help you.
Yeah. And remote experts really where we started. When I talk about factory AR, it's remote expert and guided workflows, but we really started with remote expert by putting remote expert, again, in the hands and on the heads of factory workers first. It helped us to build allies, get the factory workers used to the devices. It got people used to the concept. It helped us identify gaps in our internet connectivity. So it kind of paved the way. And then once we had the devices in the factories doing remote expert, then we were able to shift into, hey, let me show you something else that HoloLens does. Let me show you something else that RealWear does. It gives you the ability to consume pre-authored guided workflows to show you a series of tasks in a procedure so that you don't have to call somebody. You can just consume that on the device and find out the 6 steps you need to do to lock out that machine. So that's what we do a lot of, is remote expert and guided workflows in the factory.
I see the HoloLens there in the background.
Oh yeah, I got a ton of devices laying around, like I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I was going to say, if somebody's getting started in this space, you're absolutely right. The remote assist is in my opinion, is the best place to start, just because it doesn't require much technical, expertise on the team, right? Like you don't need a Unity developer, and you don't need somebody who knows UI, UX. Like it's relatively simple. You kind of buy the devices, the software is pre-built, it's easy to deploy, all that stuff. I think one thing that was interesting though that you talked about is you said, put on your head and hold in your hand. Like, how do you guys determine where or what type of device that you're using? Like, this is a head-worn device, or this is, your phone that you're using for this thing?
Yeah, I mean, so we started off with handheld devices with phones and tablets, and then safety came through and said, hey, you gotta quit having people walk around with an iPad, looking at stuff. And so we moved a lot more towards head-mounted devices, hands-free devices, right? So you can consume content in your field of view while you're working. But we have a mix. We do both, because we've got some guys that are like, I'm never putting that thing on my head. And then you got some guys that are like, yeah, RoboCop. Yeah. So you got biases both ways. I mean, what about you guys? How do you determine that mix between handheld and head mounted? Do you give them a choice, or you got a mix of both devices?
Yeah. So similar to you, like there's obviously you have to be cognizant of the environment that people are going to be working in, because you have to be careful, to your point, safety is priority. And so, but I think there's also like another kind of dividing line that we look at, which is how much do you want to scale this? And, so for instance, if you're wanting to like build an AR application and you want everybody to have it tomorrow, you are probably going to build it on a phone, not on a HoloLens, because unless you already have HoloLenses deployed out in the field, which ordering and all that, maybe we'll do a whole episode on procurement of devices.
Oh, we will. Yeah.
But if you already have HoloLenses out, or it doesn't have to be HoloLens, like let's take the whatever device out of it. If you have a head-worn device, if you build for that application, you have to have a mobile device manager that you can push the application to, and all these other things. The thing that's nice about like mobile, mobile being like your iPhone or whatever, is that most businesses already use iPhones or Android devices, and they have mobile device management setups for them. And so, if you want to kind of get started in that space, it makes it super simple, because you just upload it to the company app store, whatever the protocol is for the business, and then they can get started there. The challenge is, I think most of the headset worn AR stuff is more effectively designed for industry right out of the box. There's not as much like mobile AR stuff that I feel like is really kind of industry focused. It's more like Pokemon Go, type of stuff. And so, I don't know. I think so. We kind of divide it between, the scale that we want to do it on, and, other kind of environmental considerations that we have around that.
So we got devices in the hands and on the heads of factory workers. We've got VR happening in training rooms for training factory workers. We've got virtual reality design iterations happening. I mean, is there anything else, like when you think about, Dane, someone just starting out, anything else they might want to consider? I've got one, but I'm going to see if you got one. Kind of, what's the kind of low-hanging fruit?
Well, so I think one is 360 camera stuff. And is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, me too, man. Yeah.
Yep. So, and the nice thing about 360 camera is, one, it's super easy. Like it's easy as clicking a button, right, and uploading it to your computer. But the other thing is, like, the camera quality for 360 cameras over the last, let's say 2 to 3 years, has gotten way better. And you
Yeah.
have, things like Matterport and, all these different tools, the Insta360,
Yeah.
stuff, and a bunch of other ones, that are on the market now that make it super easy to just go and,
Right.
like there's one thing, it's called Open Space. You actually can put a 360 camera, like click it on your hard hat, and somebody just walks around and it just takes a picture. They don't even have to like intentionally scan. They just have to go and do their job, and
Right.
it creates a model of what's around them. And so um, that's a huge space, I think, being especially like remote too. Like you can have people doing measurements and all kinds of stuff and models remotely and planning and doing all these things without ever, setting foot in the field. But
We
sorry.
Yeah, no, that and 360 is huge. We have a use case right now that's happening more and more frequently, which is new hires, right? So some of our
Mhm.
factories may have 15, 20 new hires a week coming into the
Yep.
factory. The trainer can't take 20 people and go walk a loud, sometimes dangerous factory floor to give them a
Mhm.
tour, right? So we do a 360 of the entire plant. They can stay in the conference room, back to your earlier point, where it's more quiet. You can have a conversation. They can put the 360 experience up on a big screen and navigate through it, and essentially give all 20 of the new hires a tour of the plant in an
Yep.
environment where they can hear each other, right? And so that's working for us with new hires, which is, I don't know, maybe not for you guys, but we struggle with recruiting and hiring and onboarding and retaining employees.
Yeah, well, and I think you made a good point there too. Like the 360 content itself is interesting, but I also think when you start to add visual cues into that, and we're
Yeah,
starting to kind of pseudo get into the digital twin thing, right? Which
right.
will not be another episode that we'll
It
do in
will
the
be.
future. But I do think that, like notating, for instance, like where the bathroom is, or this is a thing that you're going to use frequently, they can walk through without having to be with 20 other people. They can just
Yeah,
say, hey, go and walk through this scan and let us know, if you have any questions, and they can
right,
read documentation and do all that stuff directly in the scan.
right.
So, I think of like 360 stuff is really, it's kind of like AR. It sounds funny. Well, it's contextualizing information, for people, which is really kind of what AR does too. And so I think it's funny if you think about like 360, it's like the computer version of the same content that you see in AR if you're out in the field, right?
Right.
And so there's kind of an interesting continuity between like VR, or 360 to VR to AR, in that 360 is like your environment, and then VR is like your virtual, like you want to be safe, training people type
Hmm.
of thing, and then AR is like you're out in the real world, you're trying to get real stuff done,
Right.
all that. And I think the same data in each of those applies. They're probably in different contexts, but there's kind of a continuum, if you will, between the different types of content, which is kind of interesting.
Sure, sure. So I'm going to throw us a curveball, right? We're going to end on this. I'm going to say my number one tip for people just starting out in XR and manufacturing. Here's something here's where I think you should start. Here's my big tip for where I think you should start. And then you tell us what you think, right? So what I would say is if you're just starting out in XR, I would say start with Handheld, Remote Expert, first in the factories to kind of lay that groundwork. Keep it simple, common devices. Everyone's got a phone or a tablet, and just kind of ease into the technology that way. Don't jump straight to a HoloLens 2 or something. Start off simple and start to build those allies, and again, lay that groundwork in your factories and build rapport. That would be my tip for someone starting out. What's your tip, Dane?
Yeah, so my tip for someone starting out would probably to be just dabble in a lot of different things. I think like sometimes you hear these stories of like some company that jumps in and they buy like 100,000 Google glasses or whatever, and then they
Yeah,
start using them. And the thing is, this is such a nascent industry right now that like you can't. It's I wouldn't want to bet my life on picking a winner, right?
no,
And so
no,
uh, I think I think we as kind of custodians of that within a business, should also think of it in the same way as, we're not here to pick a winner or to determine who's going to be the market maker or anything like that. we're here to supply the best experience to the end user. And the only way that if you are delivering that best experience is if you go and try everything on the market. And
Sure.
so Scott, earlier you said like, I have a bunch of headsets laying around. I'm the same way, right? Like I have probably 8 or 9 different headsets that are sitting around at my desk, and so I would encourage, it doesn't take a whole lot of upfront investment, but if you looked at Scott and I's tips as like, start with mobile so you kind of understand what it is.
Mhm.
And then if you want to get into the headset game or the hardware game, like just buy one of several of them
Yeah.
and just give them a shot.
I wouldn't buy 100 of anything starting out. That's for sure. I've been doing
Yeah.
this for several years. I still don't like buying 100 of anything, because
Yeah.
then the month after you buy 100 of something, then they get bricked, or you never know what's
Or
going to happen.
the new one
Right.
comes out and then you're
Right.
mad.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a
Well,
good conversation. Yeah.
yeah, no, for sure. And Scott, as always, it's good talking with you. I look forward to the next conversation and
Yeah, me
the next
too.
episode.
Me too. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Take care.